And we're on the air. Hello, friends. Welcome to Codementor Office Hours for today. We are really excited to be continuing our JavaScript framework series. So if you've been following Office Hours at all, we've really spent probably the past month or so meeting with all different experts of different technologies that we're fans of, surrounding the theme of really trying to wrap our heads around all things JavaScript. And we're going to be continuing that today. In terms of just some housekeeping, if you're new to office hours, I'm just going to mute whoever just joined. In terms of asking questions and things like that, if you're in the live room with us, please feel free to use the group chat to throw questions in as our guest is speaking. And if you're watching the live broadcast, there should be a Q&A app, and you can send questions in that way. I'll be sort of collecting those as we go. But without further ado, I'm excited to welcome today Kent Dodds, who is the creator of the Angular Formly library, which utilizes Angular to create dynamic forms. So this goes along very nicely with sort of the whole JavaScript series we've been covering. Kent has a master's degree in information systems. He's joining us today from Utah, where evidently it's snowing again. And we will be speaking on how to implement the dynamic forms of Angular Formly ourselves. So please, everyone on mute, please welcome Kent C. Dodds.
Hello. Kent C. Dodds. I actually, just to be clear, I didn't actually write Angular formally or create it. I inherited it or borrowed it and then took ownership. It was created by a company called Nimbly, specifically Grant Helton developed the library, and that's what we're using today. It's very different from what it was a year ago when I kind of took it, well, started contributing, and then it kind of took off in the last like 3 months. So it's wildly different. But I work at a company called Alianza here in Utah, and yeah, totally love it here. And at my company, Alianza, they're great. It's voice over IP platform. I don't know anything about voice over IP, but I do code Angular, so that's cool. So anyway, I'll go ahead and share my screen. I've got a couple of slides that I'll just go through really quickly. Oh, there are turtles all the way down. So these slides came from a talk that I gave at NGNL, and I shared a link to that talk. I'm not going to go through that entire talk. You can just watch that. But this has lots of the concepts in that I want to discuss. So, one other thing I wanted to show was just I am a husband and father of 2 beautiful children. Work at Alianza. I also run NG Air. If you haven't heard of that, I'm sorry. It's great. I like it. It's a video podcast broadcast on Google Hangouts about Angular. And then I'm an Egghead author as well. So that's a little bit about me. So here's stuff about Formly. So Angular Formly's goal is to change a bunch of HTML with classes and IDs and labels and all kinds of junk to something a lot more consumable like this, using this Formly form directive, directives that we know and love. And then obviously a little bit of JavaScript because it's not that magical. So it brings a lot of really good things to your forms with Angular, and that's why I love it. So some of you might be thinking why I really like HTML, and I'm going to convince you why you don't love HTML as much as you think you do. So let's say your boss comes to you and says, hey, I need a place for users to input their first name, and so you say, here it is, your input, and he's like, they don't know what that is for. I need a label or something, and so you give him a label, and he's like, great, and then somebody else comes along and says, hey, we have this compliance, accessibility compliance we need to meet, and so you give it a for and an ID, and so now that label and input is associated together. But then your designer comes to you and says, hey, this is ugly, we're using Bootstrap, so could you add the classes for form group and form control? And so you're fine. And then somebody else says, I want to use that, and so you create a directive so that it can be reused, so you're not copy pasting all over the place. Now it's nice because you don't need to worry about the ID. You just generate that, and whatever the ID, you don't care what the ID is. And then you just pass in the label and the model. But then somebody else comes to you and says, I need that to be required. And so you say, okay, all you need to do is add a required attribute to this NL input, and then it will set it to required. But now everywhere else in your app that's using this directive that doesn't care about whether or not this field is required, or like this field never gets required, they're still paying for that watcher. So you just multiplied your watchers by how many fields you have. I think somebody's got feedback. Okay, yeah. So yeah, everybody's paying for that watcher, even though they don't really need to necessarily. And then somebody says, hey, I need this to be conditionally disabled or have a max length or a min length, and then it just gets crazy. And now everybody's paying for tons of watchers. And not only that, but your directive's getting more complex, and so you start to think, is somebody, I think somebody's doing a lot of feedback.
Sorry, I booted him. I tried to mute him a few times. It didn't work.
Okay. Yeah, so you start to wonder, maybe I should make a like disabled input and a required input so I don't have to deal with this, but like that's just crazy talk. So enter validation, and you're like, oh shoot, now I've got to go all over everywhere in my app and fix this. And luckily we have directives, but still, that's not a lot of fun. And then somebody says, we're going to change everything, where the labels go and where the like the different required states for different things and our messaging for validation. And you wind up like Luke Skywalker when he found out his father was who was Darth Vader. Totally impossible. We can't do this. So the thing is, it really is so much simpler. With Yoda has endorsed Angular formally as a simpler way to do forms with Angular, and I took some liberties there. But yeah, anyway, so we're going to look at a little bit of code just to kind of give a little bit more of a concrete example of what this actually does. And it's going to be a little bit faster so we have time for questions. So this is a simple JS bin. I'm bringing in Angular formally. Angular formally has one dependency called API check, which I created to make it easier for you to use Angular formally. Maybe I'll cover why that's so cool, but it is. Obviously, it also depends on Angular. And then for this little demo, I'm bringing in Angular animate and Angular messages. And then we're bringing in formally and a Angular formally templates bootstrap. So it's just the templates for like if you're using Bootstrap. Okay, so now you have all of this, but all these inputs and stuff, but all of that is coming just from this markup right here. Most of your field configuration happens inside JavaScript. And the nice thing about JavaScript is it's a lot easier to keep yourself dry, keep your code dry, and so you just specify the things that matter and that are unique about this field. So obviously we want to, for the first name field, I want the first name property of my model to be bound to this first name field. And so I do that by saying, hey, this field's key is first name on the model that it's assigned to, which is passed through the model property here. And similarly for the last name. So that's one thing that you need to provide if you want it to be bound to anything. And then you also need to provide a type or a template or a template URL. But everything's going to be broken because you can't provide all of them. And so you see that field goes away. And if you looked at the console, you'd see an error indicating, hey, you can't have all three of these. So anyway, you can specify those different parameters to tell Angular formally, this is what this field should look like. Stick this template or this type where I'm putting this field in the field configuration array. And then you specify template options, and this is anything that relates to your types field configuration. So for the input type, it's expecting a label for this right here. And then it also deals with the required attribute. But I'm going to talk about that a little bit, in a little bit. So yeah, there are a couple of predefined types that you can get from a template library. We have Bootstrap and Lumix, which is like a material design library. We have Ionic templates, and we're working on Angular material, and we have a repo for Foundation. So if you are a Foundation CSS person, then you can own that, and that'd be awesome. But if you're going to be really serious about using Angular formally, I recommend that you create your own templates, because it's really, really easy to do. I'll just show you really quick. So up here in our run phase of our app, we inject the formally config, and we call set type. We give it a name, and we give it a template. And there's also a concept of wrappers, which I won't really go into. But the idea is that the templates are insanely easy. So you have this input. I have a class because it's Bootstrap, and an ng model. And that's really all that you need to get a template working. And the cool thing is that I can still provide required or even like an ng click, anything that I want to on this, even though you as the template author didn't provide any construct for something like that. Angular formally will add those dynamically for you. So I'll just give you a quick example. So I'll switch this custom input, or this input here on the first name, to the custom input. And now you see everything's still working, and it still has the label, still has the required state. And so if I remove this, then we get that red glow there. And I need to I forgot custom input on this wrapper for messaging. So yeah, we get this field is required. And inside of my input, I don't have like an ng required or anything like that. Angular formally sees this required on the template options and says, oh, this field is required, so I'm going to tack that on there. So as far as like creating your own templates, it's extremely easy and very, very dry. So I can also add an onBlur as a function. I say alert hi, and then if I go in here and I blur, then it alerts. And so you have like on blur, on click, on key up, and a bunch of different events that you have available. You also have disabled and max length, min length, stuff like that. And so that's this concept of auto magical attributes. Is Angular formally just provides those if they're needed. And the cool thing about that is you're not paying for the watcher unless you actually need it. So expression properties is also very cool. So let's say we want to conditionally make the last name required only if the first, or actually let's do it this way. If the first name is not provided, then we'll make the last name disabled. So they can't fill in their last name unless they have a first name. So to disable a field, you say disabled is true, but this isn't dynamic at all. And so we're going to specify expression properties as an object, and then we'll say template options dot disabled is an expression. So it can be an Angular expression or it can be a function. And so we can express ours as an expression. So we'll just simply say model dot first name, and we want it to be disabled if there's not a model first name. And then we can remove this from the template options. Now I can say can't see Dodds. And so all managing that that type of dynamic interaction in your form is a lot more complicated if you're trying to deal with that state inside of your controller. But having this sort of expressive syntax, or even actually kind of more imperative syntax, is super nice. So yeah, like I said, this can also be a function that returns the value that you want to have assigned to disabled. So in our case, true or false. And then it can actually also be a function that returns a promise that resolves to the value that you want to return. So pretty flexible in that way. And there's a little bit more about that, but just because I want to answer your questions, I'll keep moving. So validation is also very cool. You notice here I have this IP address. Oh, actually, let me add an expression property here to that no IP address. So I want, when I check this, I want the IP address to appear, and if I uncheck it, I want it to disappear. So to make something not appear in your fields, you say hide is true, and running. Something's running. Maybe something's broken. Oh, there we go. Okay, so but that's not actually doing anything dynamic yet, so we need to use an expression property for that. So if you haven't guessed, hopefully it should be very intuitive for you. This isn't a template option, so we're not going to do the template options dot disabled. it's on the root of our configuration, so we'll simply say hide. And then this will key off the model.noIP_address. And we're going to not that. And so then we check it, and it shows. So magical. So now with validation, we can say if I enter an invalid IP address, you see we get this, whatever you wrote is not a valid IP address. And so all of that happens, like if you've done validation, especially with Angular 1.2, you know that it's not the most fun thing to do. Now you don't have to create an entire directive just to add validation to a field. You can just provide this validators object that is an object of objects that have an expression and a message. And if you don't really care about the message, then you can just provide, like, I don't know, we'll say foo, and then your expression can just be right there. And again, this is what's called a formally expression. So just like the expression properties, this can be expressed as a string that's evaluated just like your templates would be, or it can also be a function. So you kind of have the freedom there. And this also can be asynchronous, so you can return a promise that resolves if it's valid or rejects if it's invalid. And so, yeah, and then we specify our message here, and that's this is also an expression property, so we can make this a function if we wanted to. And yeah, so that's how we kind of get that dynamic message that's a little bit more specific to the user and their input. So I can say 127.0.0.1, and now it's valid, and that message goes away. And I should note that the fancy message and the styling and all that stuff, that is not included in anything that Formally is doing. I had to do a little bit of work for that, but like I seriously just created this like an hour ago. It was really easy to do that stuff, and that's pretty like specific to your application look and feel stuff. So that's why Formally doesn't ship with stuff like that. And then let's see, I had one other thing I wanted to. I kind of covered custom templates. That's pretty easy. Oh yeah, this submit and reset stuff. So if I put in my name and then I say submit, I just alert whatever. But if I change something and say like Brooke, and then I can click reset, and it'll go back to the previous value of my model. So you have an easy ability to reset your model, which is really handy. So if it starts out with nothing, then I can reset and it goes back to nothing, and then you get that error message. So there's a little bit of work to make it not do that. But yeah, that's the submit and reset, and I'll just show really quickly how you accomplish that. In here, we're passing an options, and then Angular formally will add this reset model function to our options that we can call on reset, and then we can set or reset the initial value ourselves with this on submit. I say options update initial value. So that's, anyway, that was a feature I just barely put in the most recent stable version that I think is really handy. So I think other than that pretty much covers the base use case. There's a lot of documentation and stuff like that for Angular formally. So that's just a brief intro, but I'm happy to accept questions now.
Cool. Oh, awesome. Thanks. One question came in actually just a few minutes ago from Steven. The require is very simple. If we were to do reg, for example, would this take place in the expression properties? Maybe
I think you're talking about regex, and so yeah, regex is pretty easy to do. So you have a couple of options. You can either specify, like the IP address example that I demonstrated, that was actually using a regex, and instead of using regex, you can also specify a pattern inside of your template options. And so doing it this way will just stick the pattern directly on your ng model, and it works just like it would work if you did that yourself. So you can do it a couple, then I can specify the messages or the message for the fail case, and I have a name for the validator instead of it just being pattern. So, did that answer your question, Steven?
Cool. Yeah, he says it did. Awesome. Kent, I was curious, are there any live sites we can see formally in action?
Yeah, good question. Let me share my screen again, and I'll just show you around to the different resources that you have.
Cool.
So if you go to angularformally.com, I recently, in the last couple of months, changed this entire website from what it used to be to just a main page of huge list of features, kind of a quick explanation, and then everything else is examples. And so you can go in here, you see the example rendered here, and then you can see what the JavaScript was to actually accomplish this in the HTML and CSS. And so, yeah, for many of the concepts, you have expression properties, and you can play around with the example. You can make changes and yeah, mess around with it. And then you can also suggest an example right here. There are instructions to do so, and I welcome those contributions. I actually have one or two that I need to deploy to the to the site that are contributions from people other than me. Like, for example, there's one. Let's see. I think it was async select or validation with unique value. I think that one was not from me. Either that or the select options with controller. But anyway, yeah, this one appears to be broken. Got to go fix that one. So anyway, I welcome contributions. Yeah. So that should be a really helpful resource. And if I get a bug or a question reported, I generally will make an example and point you to that example and just add it to the site, so future generations will benefit. And then learning Angular formally, you have I'm an Egghead.io author, and so I created an introduction to Angular formally. You basically got that, and then some. And then I have 4 more lessons that should be released really soon, and I'll have added to this list. And then you can always bug me for more, and I will make more. Also, there's my NGNL talk, which is useful. And then this documentation is, I hope, pretty extensive. There's also a mailing list and a Gitter chat, which is I'm basically on there all day, unless I'm doing a podcast or something. So yeah, those are some useful resources.
I was actually promoting this session in an Angular Gitter room the other day, and then I saw you jumped in about something else. So I know that there's proof that you're definitely in those rooms. Frankel just jumped in with a question: How's it perform with large number of fields, so more than 20? That's a good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. So, yeah, at 20 fields, you'd probably be just fine. It does actually. The initial compile time does start to fall over after a while. So once it's actually compiled, then that's not a problem. But I've noticed in my app, I have a lot of stuff for each of my fields. And so if I get up to 50 fields or something like that, or maybe more, then things start to get pretty heavy for that initial compile. And so I'm looking for ways to optimize that and make that a little faster. But the problem is lots of that is just kind of an Angular problem because we're using the $compile service, and so it's not the JavaScript that's slow, it's the DOM. And so looking for ways to optimize that for huge forms, more than 50, well over 50, but you should be totally fine with 20. You'll never really notice anything. And then the nice thing is as the user's interacting with stuff, because you're using formally, you're not paying for a ton of watchers that you don't need, and so your digest cycle isn't going to pay for the fact that you have a ton of forms on the page. Because in many cases, you won't, unless you're using a lot of expression properties and things, you'll have very few watchers, just one for the ng model, and then maybe 1 or 2 for a couple more. You have an ng if to hide stuff and a couple other things. But yeah, for the most part, if you're going to go from just using Angular in your own form stuff and using Angular formally, I don't have any benchmarks, and I should probably make some, but I would venture to say that Angular formally is you'll end up with a more performant situation than if you were to just do.
Awesome. Sorry, are you still there? Just breaking up a little bit for
Yep,
me. Okay.
I'm still there.
Great. Yeah, guys, please feel free to jump in with any other questions in the group chat or the Q&A app. I have some that were emailed in. We can also hit. So, do you know what projects or organizations are currently using Angular formally? Do you have a list of any that have forked the repo and started doing stuff?
That's a terrific question. So, if you go to angular-formally.com, go to Who Uses Angular Formally, you'll see a very small list, and I'd really like to get this list bigger. I know there are a lot more apps that are using Angular Formally just based off of the activity that I see on the project, the mailing list, and on Gitter and on Twitter. So my company uses it. Also, the company Parakeet uses it. I know that because this is where I started using Angular formally. I was doing moonlighting for Parakeet. And that's my first contribution came because of a need that I had at Parakeet. And then somebody's Ducky Docs. But then you have your project, and you can submit a PR to add your own, or just tell me about it, because I want to get more users on this page. I know that there are a lot more, but I don't know who they are.
Gotcha. Since we're, I mentioned we've been doing a big JavaScript framework series. So something I like to ask all of our guests are, why, for you, it's Angular specifically. Why do you build in Angular over other options? What was it about Angular that sort of got you hooked?
Good question. So I started with Angular like 3 years ago, and so I kind of joined part in the early days. I was working at a company called Domo at the time. They sponsor ngConf, and yeah, the guys over there are awesome, and I learned a ton from them. And we started hiring some people, like the ngConf organizers. Most of them came after I was there, and they were coming in like, hey, we got to switch to Angular. We were on Backbone at the time, and they're still on Backbone. That's a big app. So so we started deciding to switch to Angular, and so I just went all in. I'm like, hey, I was an intern at the time, so I wanted to learn as much as I could as fast as I could. So anyway, I jumped on the Angular boat, and I learned as much as I could really fast, and so I could start contributing. And it was like miles and away better than my experience with Backbone. And maybe lots of that could have been the way that we were doing Backbone. I don't know, but just my experience, it was so much easier. And so, yeah, I kind of went all in. I looked into Ember just a little bit, so I never really I've had a lot of experience with Ember. Though I was just at Philly ETE last week, and the Ember guys were there and gave a talk on Ember 2.0 and some of the things that they've been doing. Really, really impressed with what they've done. Pretty different philosophy on framework. But anyway, and then I've also been doing quite a bit of React on the side. I spoke in Sweden at JFocus in February about using React inside of Angular, and I actually live coded a migration from a very, very small Angular app, but a migration from Angular to React just to show kind of the differences. So I'll get a link for you because that was just released, or the video recording was just released. So if you're interested in that, there's the link. So yeah, I like React a lot. I think they have a lot of really solid concepts, and learning React has made me a better Angular developer. And I hesitate to say Angular developer. I think it's made me a better JavaScript developer, and that makes me a better Angular developer. So so the reason I use Angular right now is I think that it has some really good paradigms. There are definitely bad parts of Angular 1. I'm super excited we're getting rid of in Angular 2. Lots of those bad parts came from assumptions that were made in the early days of Angular that are no longer valid anymore today. But I should say that Angular 1 is still a fantastic framework, and you can build some really awesome stuff with Angular. I think that it's more valuable for people to learn JavaScript than it is to learn a framework. And so, learn JavaScript. And If you're going to be doing Angular or React or Ember, do everything that you can to get as much of your logic outside of your framework and into just JavaScript, and then build hooks into the framework so that your framework-related code can use that JavaScript. So anyway, JavaScript for the win.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's really good advice. You just answered a bunch of the other questions that I had. If anyone else has any other questions, please jump in. I mean, otherwise we can keep this fairly short and succinct. You know, a lot of these sessions I always recommend for everyone to go back and watch the recording of the live code portion that you showed, because it's rare, at least for me, to digest all that in one shot. So if I didn't mention, this is all going to be on the Codementor YouTube channel, so you guys can feel free to review there. Kent, are you blogging about any of your work, or where else should people sort of follow what you're up to?
Yeah, good question. I don't blog as much as I should, or as much as I want to. So that yeah, you can find me, but I don't blog a lot. Most of my blogs or blog posts are related to like JavaScript in general or Angular, or yeah, I haven't done anything on Angular formally as I should. But if you want to keep up with the things that I'm up to, Twitter is the best place to catch me. My handle's on my little banner thing, and yeah, I tweet a lot, mostly about Angular, React, Angular formally, React formally. Yeah, so that's where you catch up with me. I did have one other thing that I could show if there aren't any other questions.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so this is there's a group of developers who have built these form generation libraries that are similar to Angular formally, and so one of them decided, hey, like we're all working on the same thing. Why don't we just collaborate and work on the same thing together? And so this amounted to Forms.js. And I haven't really done a lot of work on this. It's mostly been Brian Vaughn. But yeah, it's just this org that we have. The idea is a vanilla JS library for generating forms in this way. And then there will be adapters for the different frameworks. So really cool stuff. I've sort of, I guess you could say, consulted on a little bit of the how this library has been developed. So I haven't tried it out or really done much with it, but I think it's cool to have a vanilla JS solution. So you might look into that if you're curious and play around with it. I don't think that it's actually officially released or being used by anybody yet, though. So and the Brian Vaughn, the one who's doing most of the contributions, he created Form 4 for Angular, and that I haven't used that library a lot, but I'm pretty confident that this Forms.js library resembles Form 4 a lot, just because he wrote it and he's done most of the contributions there. So yeah, there's that.
Nice. Yeah, it's good that there's options. There's a few people going for this space. Lucas just jumped in with a question. I'm trying to get rid of Angular UI date picker and some other Angular UI components. Can I use Formally for that?
Great question. Yeah, so Angular Formally lends itself really well to using really anything that you want. So anything that you could express in a like a directive as a template, or even not, like it's really easy to use Angular formally. So let me share my screen and just give a quick demo. I don't think that I'm going to try and live code like exactly your use case, but I'll demonstrate like how formally makes this possible. So you'll use the set type to create your own custom type, and then you give it a name. So you'd say like UI date picker or whatever, and then you specify a template. This can also be a template URL. So if like it's a big template or something, then you can have it somewhere else. But then on the important part on this, and actually that in most cases that's enough. Like if you have some directive or something. But if it's not, or you don't have a directive, you don't want to write one for some reason, then it's actually really easy to add functionality to your custom types. So here you can add a controller, and this is just like a regular controller that you would have in a directive, so you can inject the scope. And then inside the scope, or on the scope, you have access to anything you would have in your template. So you have scope.options references this field configuration here. So you can have key and template options and stuff. But because scope.options.template options is a lot to type, and because you'll mostly be putting most of your stuff in the template options object, there's a shortcut, just scope.to, and that's just assigned to this same object. And so you could put like your date picker options in here, so date picker options right here, and then yeah, and then from there you have the ability to kind of do whatever you want inside this controller. You also have the link, so if you want access to the element and the attributes, you probably really won't need the attributes, but having the access to the element, so you can say like $.date picker if you're using the jQuery date picker or something. So yeah, you have is you can also have extends, and this is a little bit dangerous, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But so now this custom input extends input, and so this last name is, or rather, the first name is using the custom input, and everything's working just fine because it's getting the wrappers and the template and everything else that it needs for this to happen. And so what's cool about this is if the input has a controller already and you provide another one, they will be merged in a way that like you would expect. So the parent would run first and then yours. You don't have to call super or anything like that. So the word of caution why extends can be dangerous is if you're not familiar with like classical languages and like the idea of extends, then like bless your soul. But you just need to be careful when using something that extends another, because after like 2 levels, it starts to get really difficult to reason about your stuff, because you're like, where did I get this property and whatever. So in my apps, I have a very big app that has tons and tons of forms. I have a base type that does a couple of things that I want to apply to all my forms, or rather all my fields, and then I have like a couple of types that extend to that one, and then maybe one type that extends one of those. So you generally don't want to go very far deep with this extends, but the extends is extremely powerful and useful. And one other thing while we're talking about types here is if I go in here and I remove the first name, you notice that first name label gets removed. So if we look at the console when this compiles, you'll get this warning, and it's saying Angular formerly bootstrap formerly field failed, and it requires a label not specified in template options, and it must be a string. And so in here it says this is what you gave me, this is these are the types that you gave me, so this is a string, whatever, and then this is what the API calls for. So it's expecting like this is the problem, you're missing a label inside your template options. So this is API. What's really nice about this is as you're creating your own custom types, you can help people learn how to use your types properly by specifying API check right here. And this is an object that uses it's an object of objects, I guess, of functions that are API check functions. And if you want to learn more about API check, just go to the GitHub repo. Or just do a Google search. I'm sure it's the first result. Let's see. Yes, first result, score. So yeah, but in here it's basically React.js prop types without React. So that's why I say like React helps me become a better developer in general, just because the concepts that they've introduced, and Ember as well, has made me better. So this is why you don't want to put your head in the ground with Angular or any framework. But anyway, if you're going to use this API check feature, I encourage you to learn about API check and how it works. But yeah, so we could say in our template options, I want this to be a, well, yeah, just give you a quick demo. So we'll say, well, you just use the formally API check. You would normally make your own instance of API check, but we'll just do this. So formally API check.shape. So this template options is an object that has a specific shape, and that shape looks like, we'll say foo, and this is a string. And then we could also say it's optional. And so that way, if they do provide foo, it's got to be a string. It can't be a number or something. But it's optional, so don't warn if that isn't correct. So now I'm using this custom input, and I say, let's get this label back. And we'll use foo is 34. We'll open up our console and run this. And it'll say, this is the problem. Foo at template options must be a string. And so if I change this to, whoops, hi there, and then we'll run this, we don't get any warnings there. So anyway, I think that's extremely valuable, and I'm trying to figure out a way to get this kind of functionality in directives, because yeah, Regex prop types was a super good idea, and I think we should do it. So anyway, that's just a couple of things about. So, do we have any other questions about that, or did I answer your original question? Maybe that is a good question too. Yep.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Yeah, that was really great. Yeah, guys, if there's any other questions, feel free to throw them in. Otherwise, Ken, I don't want to take too much more of your time. But all the links that Kent shared, I'll also be sending out in an email shortly after this, so everyone can get to the GitHub repo easily and everything else. Doing one last sort of survey of any other questions. I think we can probably wrap up for now. Oh, someone else just joined. I'm just going to mute you. Well, Kent, thank you so much for your time. And for everyone else, oh, we had one other question just came in. Any issues with Rails for turbolinks?
That's an awesome question, I'm sure, but I don't know. I don't understand the question. I've never used Rails, and I don't know what turbolinks are, so maybe you could elaborate a little bit.
See if I can get in there. Well, while I was doing that, I will mention that obviously Codementor has tons of Angular experts as well to help out with any of your projects. So feel free to check out Codementor's link for any Angular issues. See if Francesco, if you could elaborate on your question a little bit, we definitely can get it in still. It's okay, thank you. Okay.
Sorry, I'm sure it works great.
Yeah, any potential problems, you won't have any with formulae.
I wanted to mention, so Angular 2, I just gave, like, I have my radar looking at Angular 2 quite a bit, and I know that's something that's really important to a lot of people, that they don't have to rewrite their entire app just to get Angular 2 working for them. So this is, I think, one of the benefits of having an abstraction on top of your framework. And this is more of a general principle, but it makes dealing with breaking changes a lot easier. And so even for me, I have an abstraction in my app on top of Angular formally. So I have a directive that uses the formally form directive. So that's the only place in my entire app where I ever use formally form. Everywhere else uses AZ form. And I think that's a really good practice. So anyway, that's just kind of an aside. But with Angular 2 and Angular formally, I have started toying around with what it would be like, and I've got a little ways to go. But I can say pretty confidently that there are few, if any, things that you'll have to change about your form configuration for it to still work with Angular 2. Once I get Angular formally up and running with Angular 2 and Angular 2 comes out. And so that should make the migration from Angular 1 to Angular 2 for you so much easier, because sure, you'll still have to refactor like your routes or your directives and different things like that, but you won't have to worry about your forms, which for many people is like the bulk of the app anyway. So this is important to me because I have an app with tons of forms, and I want it to be easy to upgrade to Angular 2. So this is something that I've been thinking about. I've actually even worked with Victor a little bit on discussing the imperative side of the new Forms API to make Angular Format easier. And in all honesty, hopefully the new imperative API will make Angular formally not really all that valuable in Angular 2. That's the hope. So the real value for Angular formally now is not only does it make things easier now, but it also should make the migration and the upgrade to Angular 2 easier for you. So you don't have to worry about your forms right away, and you can slowly switch to the new Forms API in Angular if that's where you want to go. So yeah, I thought that would be a valuable thing to mention as well.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely keeping our sights set on what's coming out next. Well, Kent, thank you so much for your time. Everyone else, thank you for joining. We have, like I said, we're in the middle of this JavaScript framework series. We have a ton of awesome office hours, about 2 or 3 a week happening for the next few weeks. So definitely check out Codementor's office hours links to see who else is coming up. And without anything else, I think I'll say good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you find yourself in the world today. And thanks for checking us out.
Thanks. See ya.